every student here has to build one business every term at Mesa.
And I don't think we need to defend our choice of offline at all.
Why did you make this decision versus, let's say, having a 3-month online bootcamp, right?
But we want to put the ed in edtech back again. We spoke to multiple startup leaders, and what we boiled it down to were 9 learning outcomes that we have in the program.
On one side, you keep hearing that there are so many young people who are looking for jobs, and on one side you have, on the other side you have companies who are struggling to hire. We just felt that that's a problem that should not exist in a country like India.
We want to become an ecosystem enabler and an institution for India which can really make the startup ecosystem grow from where it is right now to 100x in the future. And we see that that is what the future of India holds.
So in India, people are spending close to $50 billion. That's 50 billion with a B every year on just getting degrees. That's not giving them what they are paying for. So we said that there is also some value pool there, which like a real value pool, which is sitting there, which we can target instead of asking them to spend something new on something new.
How's it going? Yeah, all good, all good.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Hey, Ankit, hey, Varun. This is good. I think cut हो गया था तब तक. ठीक है. Welcome to the Day One podcast, a series where we speak to founders of Elevation's portfolio companies to understand their early journeys as they've gone about solving for the problem that they have aimed at. Today, within the podcast, we have Ankit and Varun, who are the founders of Mesa School. Welcome. At Mesa School, Ankit and Varun are creating an ecosystem enabler for building leadership talent for tech companies across the country. Today they have launched their first 12-month cohort with a batch of 63 students in their Bangalore campus, which is where we are sitting out of today. This campus, interestingly, is situated out of WeWork. Over the course of this episode, we will understand Ankit and Varun's personal journey, what motivated them to start this out, and also understand the design choices that they have made as they've gone about conceptualizing and then realizing this first cohort. Towards the later part, we would also understand what is in store for Mesa and where we are headed. So just to kick it off, would love to spend the initial few moments just understanding a bit about each of your personal journeys and from the beginning, right? Where were you born and brought up? What were some of the important influences that helped you shape who you are today, and what led you to the path at Mesa? So starting with you, Ankit.
Great. Thanks, Manish, for having us. So I think in terms of background, I was born in Jaipur. I was raised there. My entire family is from Rajasthan. I come from a family which is very service-oriented. So my father is a government engineer. My mother is a housewife. A lot of my family members are actually in education in some way or the other. So a lot of my uncles, so Chacha, Tauji, are government school teachers in small towns and villages in Rajasthan. And my uncle actually used to run a small private school inside our home in the village. So I think very early on, I got a lot of exposure to education as a system. And for some reason, I started to compare the education that I was getting in Jaipur versus the education, let's say, my extended family and cousins and other folks were getting in the village very early on. And, I could see there was a large difference. I didn't really understand the impact of it at that point of time, but I think that stayed with me. Then I think my parents wanted me to become a doctor because my father was an engineer, so he was very clear he didn't want me to become an engineer. He wanted me to become a doctor or a civil servant. I became neither. I ended up going to an engineering school, IIT Bombay, became an engineer, but then didn't pursue that in profession. Started my life at BCG as a consultant. This was back in 2010. But after a few years there, I realized I wanted to try a few new things. So ended up leaving BCG to start something. This was back in 2012 when I think startup as a word wasn't really as well known. I think there were very few examples. Flipkart was a few years old. I think we were looking for external heroes like Steve Jobs. In India, I think we were Clear Trip and Make My Trip as examples. So we tried to launch a cross-border handicraft B2B2C platform. It didn't work. I think when I reflect back, it took us almost 9-10 months to just set up the basic infrastructures, to build a website, to get the supply, to integrate payment gateway, to get the logistics, cash on delivery, review mechanism. And I think if I fast forward to today, people are able to do that in a weekend. If you want to build a D2C website, you can actually quickly set up your website on Shopify, payment gateway is integrated, logistics, there's a third party, warehousing, drop shipping is solved. I think so the world was very different at that point of time, but we also ended up making a lot of mistakes and it didn't work out. But at that point then, I decided to join a non-profit in education because I wanted to explore a bit more in education, and I felt that the only way to make an impact was to join a non-profit, so I did that. It was called Pratham. It's one of the largest education non-profits in the country. It's based in Delhi. That's where Varun and I met actually, and became friends. So again, was there for almost a year. Worked at programs on scale across majorly I would say rural parts of the country. But then I went to US to do my MBA at Harvard. Came back, was very clear, wanted to be back in India, family's here. Never applied for a US visa to stay back. And jokingly, when people ask me why I come back, I say I miss the Pani Puri here, which I do. But I think there's just so much going on in our country where I felt I could do and learn and create an impact. So yeah, came back with a healthcare company. We tried to expand renal care services in multiple hospitals in the country. It didn't work out. We sold it to a local player. And that's when I think I got exposed to the Indian startup ecosystem as bug again, and I joined Urban Company. I was there for almost 4 years. Got a chance to build really large businesses in a very fast-moving setup, in a very consumer-facing role with great founders like Abhiraj and Varun. And I think working with them for several years and being surrounded by that energy, I think sort of inspired me again to take that risk and take that plunge. So after a few years at Urban Company, actually late last year, I decided to leave that and start something again. And I think education sort of came as a choice very naturally to me. And that's when I called Varun. That let's start, and I'll leave the rest of the story to him. But yeah, that's the story so far.
Awesome. Sounds good. We'll definitely deep dive into a bit around why education, within education, what subspace. Yeah. But before we do that, Varun, over to you.
So I am born and brought up in Mumbai, spent almost like 21 years of my life there. So again, my family is also very service oriented. My dad worked for this company called BPCL, which is a government entity. He was a Ranji Trophy cricket player. So sports was in my blood. So right from the beginning, I thought that I was always going to become a sportsman. So pehle cricket, I played cricket for a while. Then I played badminton, I got very deep into it. So I was amongst like the top national players, and I thought that was going to be my life. But then I got injured. In the process of all of that, I ended up going to a engineering college that I didn't have an idea as to why I chose. I probably chose it because most of my friends went there. But yeah, I mean, into engineering, I realized that sports was not going to be my career. So we needed to do something different now that sports was not going to be the career. So the first company that came on campus was Larsen & Toubro. I was a mechanical engineer, so I went, why not go and work with Larsen & Toubro? And I worked in a department which is considered pretty boring, which is procurements. But it turned out to be like a blessing in disguise, because I probably learned like the two most important skills that I hold dear, which is like stakeholder management, communication, because procurements is such a department where there is always some kind of rush that is happening. There is just so much pressure. And for a youngster who was just entering the ecosystem, I think it was like a good experience to have. So did that for one and a half years, realized very quickly that I was very analytical. So wanted to kind of, use those skills to do something better. At that point of time, an engineer who doesn't know what to do in life usually goes for an MBA. So I said, yaar, MBA karte hai. So I gave the CAT, I did pretty well. I scored like something that made me stand amongst like the top 200 in the country. I was expecting calls from IMABC, got a call from C, but then got rejected. And that was like a very big change in my life, because I thought that my life was going to go in a certain way. Itna score karne ke baad, I thought definitely I was going to, probably go for an MBA and then go into a consulting firm. But then things changed. One of the things that happened was that when I was preparing for a IMC interview, I started reading a lot about how the government was spending a lot of money in education in rural government schools in India, but there was no metric to kind of, say whether improvement has happened or not. And at that point of time, I was pretty naive about education. So I wrote this letter to the Pratham CEO saying, this is how education in India should be changed. And obviously that was not the right answer, but I think the CEO at Pratham really liked the intent that I came in with, that, so she said, why not you just come and work here? So I traveled around at Pratham. I worked at their vocational skilling arm. I used to work as an Excel trainer. And then finally I ended up at this wing called Measurement, Monitoring and Evaluation. So that's where I met Ankit. And I remember the first day I entered Pratham, when I was going to work in the MMA team, everyone was like, oh, you're going to get to work with the guy who's going to Harvard. So I was like, okay, that's probably something that I'm going to be lucky about. It turned out to be lucky. I mean, now that we are here. So I ended up working with Pratham for almost 5 years. Built this team out called Data Analytics and Insights, worked with the government, worked with state agencies, and overall realized that, whatever work I was doing, I love to see impact in it. So every time I saw delta in the consumer or the user, that used to give me a kick. So I said, building products and seeing that delta that I am delivering to the customer gives me a kick. So let me kind of do more of that. But at the same time also, spending that much time in the ecosystem had started, plateauing my career. So I decided to do an MBA at the end of it. So I ended up going to Kellogg, was there for a couple of years, then interned at Amazon because product, and worked in the US for a year. Was very sure that I wanted to come back to India and build something. So did not want to spend too much time in the US trying to understand the US customer. Instead came back to India with Amazon, worked in Amazon in India for a year. And that's when I got a call from Ankit. It's a funny story because I was just about to leave for Iceland. And I was telling my wife that, Ankit, I think Ankit is thinking about taking the entrepreneurial leap. And if he does do that, then I'm going to say yes. And he gave me a call, and I think it took about like 6 minutes for us to decide that, okay, we are going to do something. And I think he was going to Goa and I was going to Iceland. So we took like 6-7 days off. Then we met back, and that's where I think the journey as a whole started.
Awesome.
By the way, his marriage was less than a year old.
Yeah.
So when he said that, I was telling my wife, it's a new wife.
Yeah.
It's a new wife.
He's a new husband. He's a new husband. So yeah.
No, makes sense. This is super helpful. And would love to double click a bit on the early days when you decided, let's partner together and let's start up, because we come across a lot of founders which are in the early stage of iteration and figuring out where to build in, what to solve. And hence they could learn a lot from your experience in the past, right? So would love to spend 5 minutes into understanding what went in the early days. How did you decide this space, this market, what the early manifestation of the solution could look like, and was there an Excel, was there some other method to do it, or was it sheer calling?
So I can go. So I think when we decided that we are going to work together, I think we very early on decided a few things. You can call them boundary conditions, you can call them guiding principles, and we said that we didn't have a clear idea or problem that we were confident that we are going to do, but we said that, okay, let's at least define some ways to choose. So we said that, whatever we do, it has to become large in terms of both impact. So it has to touch a lot of people, it has to touch them in a meaningful way. It also has to become a large business, and it has to become a sustainable business, or I would say a business that makes sense. And it has to become, it has to be a problem that we can care about a lot over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and, something that also feeds into, I would say, the success of this country as a whole. That's one of the reasons why we came back. So we said that, okay, let's define this, right? At least let's put this down on a board. And then we started thinking about what are some of the problems that we have seen around ourselves. And yes, there was an Excel sheet. I think there's no other way to keep track of it. So I think education as a problem, while it's very broad, but I think it was very clear to us from day one that it's a problem. But I think this was, I would say, October, November 2022. So last year, October, November. And that was the time when I think the entire investment macro ecosystem sort of went into an upheaval, right? So a lot of, you can call them a bus cycle, you can call them correction, whatever it is. But I think at that point, from an outside-in perspective, there were a lot of sectors which fell out of favor. And education or edtech was one of those sectors. So I think for that reason, we felt that, okay, let's park this for now, because it may become too difficult to convince external stakeholders and all of that. And I think that's fine. I think I'll tell you why that was also the right decision for us at that point. So we said that let's park this problem space and let's look at other problem spaces. And then we identified some of the problem spaces, and I think the approach that we followed was we would pick one problem space at a time and we would dedicate a few weeks to it and go deeper, speak to experts, speak to some potential customers, understand what the actual problem is, and try to build our own thesis of what it would take to solve this. And are there people who are already doing it? If not, can we do it better? And will it excite us if we want to do it for the next 10, 20, 30 years in terms of impact and the scale of the outcome? And I think we sort of, I would say, maybe looked at 4 or 5 spaces like this. So spent maybe 2-3 months, 2.5 months like this. And then I think came close to maybe deciding 1 or 2. But then we said, it's not really exciting us so much. And that point, I think we said, let's go back to education. We want to pick a problem. I think we were realizing that the problem itself was very meaningful as a choice for us, because we realized that I think to maintain that level of energy, passion, that commitment, unless it's a problem that we really, really feel about, we wouldn't be able to sustain that. And I think in those first few months, it's very unstructured, very ambiguous. I mean, there are no clear milestones. So you're anyway, not sure if you're moving forward or backward or where are you, right, in that universe. So I think we decided that, the problem we have to choose so that it excites us. So we said that let's, I think the discussion we had was forget about macro, forget about what's happening in the world. This problem is not yet solved, right? Which means that people are not doing it correctly. Or if there are, it will also take them some time. And if this problem is not yet solved and this problem is meaningful and we are passionate about it, then we can do something about it. And if we are doing it the right way, we will find support. I think that conviction we got to at some point of time. And then within education, we zeroed in on higher education. I think very early on, I would say, because of a couple of reasons. One, we felt that, I think we've seen that problem personally. So, I mean, Varun's story, right? So, Varun came from an engineering college which is not in the top 2% or 3% of the country. But then there was no way for him to signal his potential or the fact that he was hardworking and learn very fast. And that's the story of, I would say, hundreds of thousands of youngsters. I mean, we have enough examples around us in our friends and family who are now doing great, but had to work really, really hard to get those opportunities. I think even as employer and a hiring manager at Urban Company and other places, I have found it incredibly hard to find great talent. And so on one side, you keep hearing that there are so many young people who are looking for jobs, and on one side you have, on the other side you have companies who are struggling to hire. We just felt that that's a problem that should not exist in a country like India. And we said, let's solve that. That's one. Second, we also saw that there's a large value pool here. So in India, people are spending close to $50 billion, that's 50 billion with a B, every year on just getting degrees across undergraduate, postgraduate programs. And clearly that's not enough, or that's not giving them what they are paying for. So we said that there is also some value pool there, which like a real value pool, which is sitting there, which we can target instead of asking them to spend something new on something new, right? And third, I think we also felt that in early education years, it's also very difficult to substantiate the outcome you're creating. So if, let's say, I have a 2.5-year-old son, and when I go to a school, I have no way to choose schools. Like, how do I choose school A versus school B? Because it's very hard for them and me to understand what is the tangible difference between what they will do for my, for that student. Versus in higher education, we felt that there's a very tangible endpoint that everybody is looking for, which is usually a career progression, right? So we felt that because of those 3 reasons, that was like a very attractive segment for us to go after. Obviously, we felt very passionately about it. We felt that we've all listened about the demographic dividend of the country, and we are going to miss the bus. So I think from a personal standpoint, that was just, I think it was ticking all the right boxes, and that's how we zeroed in. And I'll tell you why not choosing education as the first idea to go deeper was a good decision in hindsight, because I think it allowed us to build a conviction on the problem first, and then we worry about how do we solve for the support.
Yeah. Makes sense. No, super helpful. And in your words, would love to understand what is the vision behind Mesa, right? What is it that we are building, and then take it on from there.
Yeah, sure. I can probably take the first go at it, and then you can add. So I think, borrowing from the problem that Ankit spoke about, there are a lot of problems that are usually called like tar pit problems. These are problems that everyone knows about and have been around for a while, but cannot be solved in a way which is profitable for the ecosystem as a whole. When I say profitable, it is not only money, but it is valuable for the customer and is valuable for a business that is trying to solve it. So with higher education, I think till recently it was like a tar pit problem. It was a tar pit problem because we know that there were $50 billion which were being spent on higher education, but at the same time we also knew that everyone who's entering the job landscape is not being extremely productive and is not being as employable as possible. And the reason why it could not be solved was, I think, because of a couple of reasons. I think one was that we as a country have been obsessed with degrees. And because we've been obsessed with degrees, and there's a reason for that, there's a valid reason for it. It's not as if the customer was wrong, but there was a time in India when the amount of jobs that we had were much higher than the number of degrees that we had. That's why the jobs asked for degrees, right? But that situation has changed now, and we've been a society that has been obsessed about degrees as a whole. So that's been one thing, and hence what has been the most monetizable thing in the higher education space has been degrees, right, on one end. But having a degree does not have anything to do with the fact that whether you're going to be productive or employable in the ecosystem, and that's why that problem could not be solved. The second reason why it could not be solved was because the way hiring was happening, the hiring was not happening for skills because they are much more difficult to assess. It was happening for degrees because so if you have a good degree and if you come from a good college, then you're going to get hired, right? And that's why that problem could not get solved, because what was monetizable and what was being looked for by the job givers was degrees. And we saw that there were some tailwinds that were suggesting that this was about to change, and that's why we felt that this tar pit problem was actually not going to be a tar pit problem anymore. Fundamentally because the landscape as a whole is going to be shifting from it requiring degrees to it requiring learning outcomes. And that's happening due to multiple reasons in the ecosystem. Number one, there are many people who have degrees, but there are only a few who are getting jobs. So our fascination with degrees as a country is going down very, very fast. And over the next decade, I think it's fundamentally going to change.
And in fact, just to add there, an interesting data point is the number of people who give JEE every year actually is declining at the moment.
Yeah, right. So what is happening is that people have started realizing this, that only probably 1% of those who get degrees are going to get the skills and hence going to get the jobs. Hence, don't look for degrees, look for the skills, right? That's one. Number two, I think the people who are hiring themselves are changing, right? And it somehow, I think, started also with the need for software developers, where everyone started saying that whether or not you have a degree in software development or computer science does not matter, you just need to be a great coder. And I think that fundamentally changed the landscape, where companies started saying that we are going to be hiring for skills. We don't care about whether or not you have a degree. I'm not saying that completely has happened, but over the next 10 years, I think that's going to fundamentally going to change. And number three, I think if you look at the current skills landscape, it is moving so fast. Like till recently, yesterday I was just seeing the OpenAI conference video, where now people can create their customized GPTs and build their apps and try to monetize it on the app store that OpenAI is going to be building. So the kind of skills that are required to be productive and employable in today's ecosystem are fundamentally different from what it was like 10 years ago. But has business education or any kind of education changed in the last 10 years? Absolutely not. It's pretty much remained the same, right? So we felt that that suddenly this problem, which was seeming like a tar pit problem, now could be solved. And when we looked at this ecosystem, we wanted to be when we looked at the ecosystem, we wanted to be extremely focused on what part of this ecosystem we want to start from. And one of the biggest things that we saw was the startup ecosystem. In India, it's like growing very, very, very fast, right? But at the same time, if you think about it, it's been around for a while, but there hasn't been anyone who has taken the knowledge, the skills, the experiences in the startup ecosystem and tried to institutionalize it for the next batches. There are entrepreneurs who are super helpful in kind of passing on that knowledge, but that knowledge hasn't been like institutionalized in a way that it should be. I think what we want to become is we want to become an ecosystem enabler and an institution for India which can really make the startup ecosystem grow from where it is right now to 100x in the future. And we see that that is what the future of India holds. But when we say that we want to be an ecosystem enabler, we feel that the skills and the talent landscape is going to be playing a big, big role in that. And hence, what we need to do is we need to be able to create individuals from where they are right now to become extremely productive and useful as startup leaders, or as entrepreneurs, or as founders, or as creators for that matter. And I think there hasn't been an education institution that has been created so far that has been focused only and only on that. If I were to draw like parallels, I would say that if in the US, you would say something like a Stanford. It has played a massive role in building Silicon Valley as a whole. It is a place that attracts the right kind of people. It is the place that attracts the right kind of faculty. It attracts entrepreneurs. It's like a hub for innovation, right? And that's where, and that is what creates the fuel for the Silicon Valley. I think in India, there hasn't been an institution that has been creating that fuel, that human fuel that is required for the Indian startup ecosystem to grow. And that is what we want to be in the long term. That is what our vision is, and at least we believe that given the potential of young individuals, given the potential of the entire startup ecosystem as a whole, given the potential of India in the next 10 years, we can build a pretty large institution out of this, which has different kinds of programs. All of that, which programs will be started, whether there will be business programs, whether it will be tech programs. I think that's for us to think about in the future. But we strongly believe that if we can have differentiated pathways that can be created, working backwards from what the learning outcomes are, working backwards from what the job outcomes need to be, and working backwards from what kind of hands-on and industry immersive experiences are required for anyone to be a strong startup leader, then I think there is a lot of value that we can create in the startup ecosystem. Anything to add to that?
No, I think that.
Varun, this was super helpful. Actually, would love to change gears a little bit and go deeper into some of the design choices that we've made as we've launched this program. So I think the first design choice where I wanted to spend some time on was why business roles, right? And what was the focus behind that?
So I think a couple of reasons why we chose business roles, or I would say non-technology roles to begin with. I think one, we are both coming from non-software development background. So I think there was that sense of what do we really understand well enough, right? We've been in those roles, we've hired for those roles. You can call them business generalists, you can call them product manager. So Varun was product manager at Amazon. I was in a business category leadership role at Urban Company. So we understand those roles, right? Versus, do we understand a software developer role that well? No, right? So that was one reason. Second reason, if you look at any startup organization, right? Unless it's a completely tech product driven business, all startups orgs in India are usually 1/3 technology software developers and 2/3 business, which can have multiple functions, business journalist, category, supply chain, product, finance, brand and marketing, right? So we felt that there was a large segment of roles which exist. And when we looked at the ecosystem, we saw that there were some players who were solving for those very specific skills which are required for software developer roles, but there was nobody who was solving for the business role or non-technology roles. Outside in, it also looks very fragmented, but there we also have a very unique and I would say very strong hypothesis that almost all of these roles require a very strong horizontal core of competencies and skills. So, going back to what Varun said in the beginning, that, he learned stakeholder management, he learned communication. So I think if you compare, let's say, a great business leader versus a great product manager versus a great brand and marketing person, I think 2/3 of their skills and competencies are same, which could be data-driven decision making, their ability to move fast, take decisions, survive in ambiguity, structure problems, lead teams, inspire people, communicate with purpose. I think all of those are very fungible competencies and skill sets where we felt that that's common. And then obviously you have a layer of functional expertise which people build over time, right? Based on their interest and what they are good at. And because of those reasons, we felt that, this is like a great, very large, but still a very wide space from a talent need perspective that we can come in and solve, especially given our background and expertise and our unique insight into what competencies do they need.
Makes sense. Awesome. Also, the second design choice regarding our program is that we've gone ahead and launched a 12-month full-time in-person in-person cohort, right, for students. And again, this is a primarily offline experience. Again, this is a very contrarian bet to take as a starter, especially in the early days of a venture, right? So how did you think around this decision? Why did you make this decision versus, let's say, having a 3-month online bootcamp, right?
No, I think we were, so let me answer it this way, right? So I think EdTech has been around for a while, but we want to put the ed in EdTech back again. And so this is, and we had multiple conversations on this, me and Ankit, and there's this word that is thrown around a lot in EdTech, which is the program scalable or scalability? So both me and Ankit kind of tried to define what scalability means for the EdTech ecosystem, and this is how we defined it. So I think usually scalability is defined as operational scalability. How fast can you go from serving 10 customers to 1 million customers, right? I think we kind of flipped it and we said, how fast can you go from acquiring 10 customers to 1 million customers? So how fast or disproportionately do your customer acquisition costs drop over time is what scalability is for the EdTech ecosystem, is the way we kind of ended up defining it. And I think at the core of any education business or even tech business for that matter is a fundamental flywheel that needs to run. The flywheel that needs to run at when you're trying to build an EdTech company is that you need to be able to give great outcomes. Those could be learning outcomes, there could be job outcomes, there could be some kind of outcomes or a delta that people see in individuals who are going through the program. Once you've given those outcomes, you attract better people to join the program, which allows you or gives you more fuel to make the program better, which allows you to give better outcomes, and that's when the flywheel kind of starts. So we kind of worked backward to say, okay, if we have to make a scalable EdTech business, which means if we have to, build a flywheel which is very, very strong, which allows us to acquire customers at a lesser cost, better customers, serve them even better, and so on and so forth, what do we need to do? And we kept all options open in front of us. Online was operationally an easier way to kind of go. But we also realized that in an online model, making the flywheel stronger is very, very difficult. And there are a few reasons for that. Say, for example, we had the same program in an online model. Number one, the barriers that are there for students to join this program are very low. So usually the intent is low. Usually the kind of trade-offs that they need to make to be a part of the program are low, and hence their seriousness is low. Because their seriousness is low, the kind of program that we can build, the experience that we can build is low. Because that is low, we can't provide great job outcomes, and hence the flywheel can't be started. So we worked backwards from the fact that if we have to make that flywheel really, really strong, what is it that we need to do? And we understood a few things, right? Number one, to give great job outcomes, the students that we'll need to choose will need to have a certain caliber, a certain aptitude, number one. Number two, the experience that we need to give them will need to be very, very differentiated, will need to be extremely extensive, and will need to be like very different from what exists out there. And we realized that could not be done in an online mode. The third is that we realized that we would also need to do a lot of career prep would need to make it extremely industry immersive, would need to get startup leaders to come and interact. Again, something that we could not do in an online mode. So eventually, I think what we realized was that to get these 2 or 3 things right, so that the flywheel starts moving very, very fast, it became ample clear to us that it had to be an offline model, an in-person model to start with. What we realized was that if in the first 2 or 5 years, whatever it is that the time it takes, if we could establish ourselves as a strong offline, provider of education, and you could kickstart that flywheel, then that flywheel could allow us to even broaden our horizons, could allow us to go into many other things, could also allow us to probably start an online program someday. We don't have it in our mind right now, because right now we are completely focused on making sure that that flywheel is as strong as it can be. But those were the main design decisions. We were working backwards from the fact that the flywheel needs to be very, very, very strong. And we figured out that the answer to that is that we need to go offline and in person.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. I think when people ask online and offline, when people ask us whether we are online and offline, I think that's a wrong question to ask. It should not matter, right? I think what you should be asking any educational institution is, what is the outcome you're trying to deliver? And then, is the medium that you're choosing to deliver that outcome the best medium, right? So going back to what Varun said, I think we are trying to create a huge amount of delta in the students that will stay with us for a year, right? And they will become future leaders in some of the largest startups. And I think the amount of transformation that they have to go through requires them to be present in a very immersive, in a very, I would say, peer-to-peer facilitated environment. And that is the reason why we chose, that is one of the biggest reasons why we chose offline. Because we first ended up defining what is the outcome we want to create, which can help us create that flywheel. And then to create that outcome, what is the best medium? And offline was the medium. And then we said that if we want to be outcome first, if we want to deliver outcome, then we can't shy away from doing hard things. While offline is much harder than online, if this is what it's required to do, this is what needs to be done for that outcome. So I think when people ask whether you're online and offline, that's actually not the right question to ask. Absolutely not the right question to ask. And I don't think we need to defend our choice of offline at all.
Makes sense. Super. Would love to deep dive a bit more on the course itself and understand what would a typical student's day, week, journey across the entire 12-month program look like, and how have we tried to impart some of the industry relevant information and knowledge that we talked about, which will help them, which would help us deliver the right outcomes.
Yeah, sure. So one is, so this is a 12-month PG program that we have started in startup leadership. So usually if I were to talk about the different pedagogies that we have employed, so there are, again, like working backwards from what are the outcomes that we want to deliver. We spoke to multiple startup leaders, and what we boiled it down to were 9 learning outcomes that we have in the program. So outcomes like data-driven decision making, being able to kind of have bias for action, take decisions at the right time, having that agile way of working. So there are 9 learning outcomes that we ended up defining. Now, when it comes to pedagogies, we have around 2 or 3 pedagogies that we deploy. So number one, we have like faculty from top business schools that comes and teaches. That there is a part of business education which is already solved for. There are some really good faculty out there. It was interesting to kind of talk to this faculty about this new model, which was much more hands-on. Some of them did not agree, some of them did. So finding this faculty was slightly difficult. But it is a piece that was kind of solved already in the business education space. So we took advantage of that, and we have faculty from top business schools that comes and teaches. The second is we have these startup leader immersion sessions that we keep doing, and that probably comes from our experience also. Like the most transformative learning experiences that I had at Kellogg were usually ones where I used to do a case, and the next day, the protagonist of the case was sitting in the class with me and was telling me exactly what happened in the decision making process, which was a part of the case, right? So we try to emulate that for the students again and again. So just in term 1, which has been like 8 weeks, there have been around 10 startup leaders who have come in, and we have written a real life case study around the startup leaders' decision making in the startup that they are working in. So what students have to do is they read these case studies. The next day, the person who's the startup leader comes in class, discusses the case study, tells them exactly what happened. Students get to present their work and get feedback on, what they thought was the right answer in the case study. And it really leaves them with unparalleled information about how the startup ecosystem as a whole functions. Now, besides that, also we have live startup projects. So along with these students just learning in the classroom, they get to interact with startups a lot. So in term 1, we have projects from Urban Company, Swiggy, we have Neo Solutions, and many other startups that are engaging with us to give our students startup projects. I think the most interesting part of the pedagogy that we have here is what we call BYOB, which is not bring your own booze, but build your own business. So what happens here is that every student here has to build one business every term at Mesa. And it does not need to be like $1 billion or $1 million business for that matter. But what we want to take them through is that entire circle of figuring out a product, falling in love with a problem, going deeper into the problem, interacting with customers, doing real sales, and so on and so forth. So even recently in term 1 itself, there were like 15 businesses that were built, and cumulatively they ended up doing some 15 lakhs of revenue, which is remarkable in like 6 weeks. And really giving them a window into what it really takes to sell a product, because usually people feel that product ban jayega and then we'll sell it, but the amount of effort, the amount of rejections that they have to face even before like selling one product is an experience that we wanted to give them. So it's a blend of all of this that really makes experience at Mesa. Anything to add?
Sorry, before Ankit, you jump in, can you talk about a few examples of the BYOB businesses? What was the most unique one that was?
So I can tell you the ones that made the most amount of money. So there was a business that made tote bags, right? So I did not know that tote bags were an in thing, but my wife bought like a couple of these tote bags. So they had these like cool bags with a zip and some really funky and quirky quotes on it, right? So that was a business. So they figured out a supplier, they went to the supplier, they did branding, they spoke to customers to realize whether this was a pain point. There was a very clear insight that they got that tote bags don't have zips on it. And many people actually carry laptops in it and they fall over. So they said, why not just target this specific use case? Let's have tote bags which have zips, which can, carry laptops. Because women like to carry laptops to work in tote bags. This is an insight that they came up with, which was super interesting. And
and this was done in how much time?
This was like 6 weeks. And so even during the student flea market that was set up, we could see these students trying to sell tote bags to women, trying to put a laptop in it and say, "Dekho ye andar jata hai." My wife bought a couple. So there was a coffee business. There was a business that was doing makhanas. A lot of D2C businesses, because these are like easier to go to market with rather than like tech businesses, which are usually like difficult to go to market
Makes
with.
sense.
So a few examples of what students ended up doing.
No, but I think their journey of picking a product, trying to figure out the problem it's serving and the unique customer insight, and then how do you communicate that value back to customer, either in person or online, and then how do you design those initial 500 customers ka go to market, and then actually going on the ground and trying to sell it and convincing somebody to pay you 500 rupees for a product, I think is the most important part of it. Some of them actually failed at it. While Varun shared a few examples which worked, there were a few examples which didn't work at all. And I think that's the most important part of it, that they realize, they understand and appreciate how difficult it is to do things, and for multiple reasons, right? I think, but even beyond the things that Varun mentioned, what we also end up doing is we end up packaging all of this, whatever time students are doing, in what we call as business essentials. So they end up spending a lot of time on honing their data and data processing skills. They end up spending a lot of time on practicing communication, verbal communication, public speaking, delivery. Almost all startup leader immersions, almost all sessions happen as presentations. So they continuously have to work on their strategic communication, their public speaking skills. They continuously get feedback. They get a lot of they have to work in groups. They get continuously peer-to-peer feedback. So I think that entire packaging of business essentials is also what makes it complete and pretty different from some of the other educational experiences that we have personally come across.
And this sounds super interesting.
And I think you Manish, actually took a class recently at our institution, right? So would you mind sharing some experiences there? Like, how was that different from, let's say, a class that you would have attended at, let's say, IIM Ahmedabad?
I think the biggest difference was that students that I interacted with were much more well-versed with the startup ecosystem than what I was back in college, right? I think all of these students live and breathe startups. They understand how fundamental drivers of these businesses have shaped up, and it is unimaginably hard to actually impart this education in 8 weeks, right? Which you folks have definitely achieved. So I think the biggest difference for me was generally awareness of underlying drivers and knowledge about the startup ecosystem amongst the students. Second was curiosity, right? I think one of the students, in fact, asked me what makes Mesa 10x different than other education institutions out there. There were students who were putting themselves in the shoes of the consumer and trying to understand how consumer marketplaces are created, right? And that for me was very inspiring. The other part I really enjoyed was the amount of hustle and energy students had put in even ahead of the session. So I had shared some notes last minute. Obviously, yesterday was India's final, so I ended up I was late night preparing the presentation. So I only got last minute time to share the exercise. But each and every person inside the class was very well prepared and had a basic understanding of the exercise that I had shared. So that just shows me commitment and enthusiasm towards what is being taught in classroom. So I think those were two, three major differences I thought versus a regular B school class that I had been a part of.
Yeah. And then double clicking on the question that one of our students asked you.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, we are an offline first business. We are building an education business at a time when I think education as a sector has fallen out of favor.
Yeah.
What made you so bullish about our vision, whatever we are trying to do?
Yeah. No, so if I take a step back, right, at Elevation, we have been believers of opportunities in education for the past decade now. We were covering EdTech as a space when no other fund used to look at it. And every year, consistently, we invest in a few companies which are innovating on the frontiers of education. For us, this problem in higher education has been there, and all of us have personally also faced it through our education, right? We've been products of Ivy League institutions in India, but only we know what the state of curriculum is in many of these institutions. And this is the state in Ivy League, right? The moment you look at 90 to 95% of students who go to tier 2, tier 3 colleges, the massive gap in outcomes is abhorrent. And that problem on the supply side continues to exist for the past 5-10 years now. At the same time, on the demand side, having been part of so many tech companies over the past 2 decades now, we realize that the biggest bottleneck in scaling a company in India today is not capital, it is not consumer demand, it is actually talent, which will go and build these institutions, right? And thus, for us, this contradiction has always stared us in the eye, that on one side you have supply which is unemployable, on the other side you have demand, or you have companies which are struggling to acquire the right talent. And hence for us, it was apparent that there would be institutions created which would fill this demand supply gap, right? For us, again, as you had pointed out earlier, online versus offline is a manifestation of the solution, right? It's not the decision criteria. For us, the biggest criteria has been to back a mission-driven team which can actually deliver outcomes. And whether it is online, whether it is offline, overall, we believe that businesses in India across categories evolve to be omni-channel businesses, right? Whether it's D2C, whether it's consumer marketplaces, most have turned out to be omni-channel. And hence for us, it was finding the right team and the right space to build it in, and having a very sharp focus on outcomes, which is the reason why we continued to back. Now the question is why business education made sense for us. So again, this was thanks to your insights. But once we started double clicking into the P&L of various B schools in India, right? What we realized is that each of the IIMs is a 200 to 300 crore top line business with a 35% PAT. So not only these businesses create massive impact, but these businesses are definitely very high quality businesses to back. And hence, we decided to come in at this part of the journey. For us, as I said, fundamentally it is all about outcomes, right? And education is a brand business. So if in day zero you are able to get that flywheel rolling, if you can create that brand over the life as that brand lives and grows, there are multiple new opportunities that grow, right? So for us, it isn't the question isn't what cycle of edtech we are in, or the question isn't online versus offline. For us, it is, as you rightly pointed out, it is that this is a really deep problem and this is the right time to go ahead and solve it, and the market cycle will take its own sweet time.
Yeah, but in cycles come and go.
Yeah, cycles come and go. Real businesses continue. But yeah, I think that was the major inspiration. But thanks for describing the curriculum, and it definitely looks very interesting. And I can imagine a lot of my peers who are startup leaders who would want to come and contribute to this program. So what would be your advice? How can they reach out to you? In what manner can they contribute back to this program?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we chose to be in Bangalore is because we are building for startup as an ecosystem. And if you're building for startup ecosystem in India, there is no reason you're not in Bangalore, right? So that's why we are in Bangalore. And I think involving the ecosystem as key part of our curriculum and program is critical. So startup leaders can actually get involved in multiple ways. One, they can come in as practitioners to teach some concepts, or let's say, cover some specific parts of the business that they have specific insights into, and take our students through that. So for example, let's say you're great at customer analytics and you want to give back. You can come here and teach our students. So that's one way to do it. Second, we also have several live projects always on with startups, where our students work on real problem statements with startups and can help move the needle on some of those mission critical problem statements as interns, as part-time, I would say contributors. Then there are other ways as well. You can come and engage with our students even outside of these two. You can come for a fireside chat. You can come as a mentor. You can become a guide to some of our students. Even we are also organizing some, sector and company treks, where if you want to, you can host our students at your campus, take them through some of the problems, give them some real case studies on the spot to solve, and see the insights that they come up with. So there are multiple ways in which we are looking to involve the startup as an ecosystem, which it has already started through our close network and network of our peers. For folks who want to get in touch, they can get in touch directly with me or Varun on LinkedIn, or anybody they know us through. We are more than happy to accommodate them. I think it's just the beginning. We will need all the support and all the ecosystem to come together to sort of create this movement in the long run.
Awesome.
And just to add to that also, I think when we were engaging with startup leaders also, we realized that there are like 3 problems that people face. Why people haven't, imparted this knowledge and experiences that they have already. Number one, I don't think they had a sustainable platform to do that. So everyone needs to build their own YouTube channel, which is not something that is sustainable. So that's where we come in and we act as this platform. Number 2, I think people just don't have time, which is a real thing, because they are building their own startups. Like startup leaders are building their own startups. So what we do is that we take care of a lot of stuff that they would otherwise need to, take care of. There have been many startup leaders who have come, who have contributed to Mesa and have not had to spend more than 5 hours working on what they wanted to impart, because we gave them all the business writing support, all the support that is required to make sure that the knowledge that they have in their mind is translated into something that is useful to students. And the third is, I think, just general trepidation that they've never taught before, right? And hence that's our pedagogy is not about startup leaders coming and teaching. It's about startup leaders giving feedback to students on their work. And that's why leaders are much more comfortable just coming there and, giving feedback on something that they've worked on for the last 10, 20, God knows how many years. So those are the three problems that we are solving for them, which and hence, it's an appeal for anybody out there that, if you feel that you've learned something in the startup ecosystem and want to come and share, get in touch with Ankit or me. We would love to have you come and interact with Mesa students. I'm sure you would have a great time doing it.
That makes sense. And could you talk a bit about the students that we have acquired in the first cohort as well? I understand we have 63 students which have started the journey with us. So where did they come from? What did they do earlier? And also, how did you go about convincing these students, right? Because this is the first batch. No one has heard about Mesa. Like 1 year back, there was no Mesa. And today we have a full-fledged batch of 63 students who are contributing their entire energy and time into this cohort, right? So what went in behind convincing them to be a part of this batch?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back, it's amazing because if I were to rewind to somewhere around March and April, we had a team of around 6 or 7 people. We wanted to have a cohort of 60, and I don't know how we were so confident that we would end up doing it. At that point of time, I think we had a lot of learnings as to how to build a funnel for a program which is as high intensity as this one. But at the same time, I think we also had our, North Star there, that the quality of people who are coming into the program needs to be very, very high. Now, it's a conundrum of sorts because we are trying to get this great batch in for an institution which has not been built yet. So we had to create certain, RTBs or reasons to believe that we were indeed going to be this institution that we were promising to be. And for that, Elevation Capital, the fact that Elevation Capital had funded us, helped us a lot. We also got a lot of angel investors on board. We created a lot of content around the fact that, like Ankit was saying, we tried to position ourselves, and that's what we are as an institution which has been built by the startup ecosystem, for the startup ecosystem, and belongs to the startup ecosystem. And that allowed us to create a really good top of the funnel of students that were in. Now, when we were choosing the students, that's when I think both of us and even the team had a lot of debates about how do we go about choosing the right kind of students once we had created enough top of the funnel. And I think we over-indexed on coachability, on hunger, and on intent. Of course, basic aptitude needed to be there. That was a base requirement, so to speak. But besides that, rather than ability or the ability or knowledge, I think we over-indexed on the fact that how hungry was the person to learn, how hungry was the person or motivated was the person to really invest a lot of time into what we are going to give them over the next 1 year, and how ready they were to kind of, put in everything that they've got to make that jump necessary. So those were a few things, and I think in the process, it was a very personalized process, and there was no other way to kind of go around it. So every single student who had applied to us, and there were roughly 1,500 applications that we got, out of which we ended up speaking to at least 600 of those, and ended up speaking to 600 of those. So out of these 600 individuals, both me and Ankit have spent about 1 to 2 hours with each one of these individuals. Out of these 60 individuals, we saw about 150 odd individuals who were really promising. We've probably spent more than an hour, probably 3 to 4 hours talking to them, talking to their parents, talking to their brothers, their sisters, their friends, trying to convince them that what we were building was extremely essential. And I think it's a very different approach because you first have to get them to apply. Once they have applied and we feel that they are really good applications, we have to push them to come to the program, which is actually paying. And that's where the barriers become really large. And that's when that personalized touch is extremely helpful. I think if there was a lot of learnings during this entire process, but I think one of the learnings that, and Ankit can add, of course, because we were both very, very involved in this, but top of the funnel, the biggest learning for me was that usually people categorize the customers by the channel through which we go through. But that's not, at least we realized that the customers that were interested in this program were more or less the same. the intent with which they would kind of go through a particular channel was slightly different. And hence the customers itself were not different, but the intent with which they were looking at the program was different. So instead what we started doing was that once there was a lead that was generated through a program, we would treat it very differently if it came from a certain channel versus another channel, rather than saying that the customers of this channel are like wrong. So, and it was an omni-channel, multi-channel approach that we had to reach out to, because education is that game that it can't be like the single channel approach. It needs to be like this entire environment that needs to engulf whoever this person is who's trying to make this decision. But yeah, Ankit, anything to add to that?
No, I think looking back, obviously we did it.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it, it's obviously a different story, right? So there are periods of doubt, there are periods of, there is no playbook, it has not been done before, at least we don't know if it has been done before. And so I think there was a lot of experimentation that happened. Most of them didn't work out, obviously. There were obviously periods where we had more failure experiments than successful experiments. Obviously, there are those weeks where we weren't clear what will happen and what will not happen. But I think overall it worked out. I think I think it was just a lot of experimentation. I mean, we were clear that we want to hit this outcome, and we said that whatever it takes, we have to get it done. So I think we didn't shy away from spreading ourselves too thin. At that point, it looked like crazy, but I think we did what needed to be done. So I think that's one thing which I took away from that exercise. And then the entire team sort of obviously came together, pitched in, and it was a crazy 2-month, 3-month period. I think there was a time when I think every day we were just doing something. So in the evenings, we used to have like networking events or these small group sessions, online, offline. So Varun was the face online. So everybody who used to register on a website, they had to attend an online info session. So Varun was that face. So every day Varun was, 7
1.5 hours, 7 to 8:30 was an
7
info
to 8:30
session.
Varun was,
Every single day.
Chai pe charcha with Varun, like info session with Varun.
There were times when my wife used to wake me up and I used to start talking about the info session.
It was just happening non-stop. And for me, I used to go to offline dinner. So like every day I was eating outside. At one point, I actually started having dinner before I used to go, and said that I'm just going to go and meet people and let them have dinner. I'm just going to go and sit and talk to them, answer their questions. Because I think there was no other way for us to convince these 60 people but to put ourselves out there and say that, because they wouldn't come for any other reason. We realized this very early on, that doesn't matter what we tell them, they will only come only if they believe in us, like Varun and me. And for that, we had to spend time with them and make them believe that we are going to continue to do that, and we have their best interest at heart. And I think that's what worked ultimately, with all the process and all the design and the packaging around it of the communication. I think ultimately that is what worked. Yeah.
And how has the first batch shaped up? If you can talk a bit about where are these students from, what professions were they in earlier, what kind of experience did they bring in as they came into this program?
So I think overall cohort is fairly diverse. So we sort of we were very clear that we wanted to create sort of a melting pot where peer-to-peer learning is at the next level. The network that they're forming is also fairly diverse. So just to give you a few statistics, our average work experience of cohort is 3.5 years. So almost all of them left their full-time job, moved cities to Bangalore to spend a full year with us. We have a fairly diverse in terms of gender. Almost 40% of them are women. We also have diversity in terms of their educational backgrounds. So only less than 50% or half of them are engineers by education. We have folks who are lawyers, who are chartered accountants, who are commerce graduates, who are, I would say, literature and philosophy graduates, even like army veterans, doctors. So I think we were very clear we wanted to create that diversity. We also wanted to, focus on getting people who are very excited and passionate about startup as an ecosystem. So you also mentioned this, right? People who are very passionate about startups. So folks are hustlers here. So more than half of them were working or have worked in a startup before. Almost 1/4 of them have tried to start something of their own at some point of time in the past. So I think we looked for those traits, right? In terms of, education institutions, they all come from great institutions like, let's say, Vellore or NITs. A few have actually come from IITs. Some actually have done courses at IIMs and SPGen and are now coming at Mesa, because I think that speaks to the fact that they didn't find what they were looking for there. In terms of companies that they were working, I think we have startups, but they were also like working at large companies like consulting companies like EY, EXL. They were working at Capgemini, Microsoft. I think there's a fair degree of spread across, and I think they're fairly happy with the diversity and spread of experiences the cohort has right now.
Super, and would love to change gears a bit and try to do a bit of crystal ball gazing. So now that the first cohort is on its way, a lot of the processes have been stabilized and the first batch is ongoing. Where do you see Mesa, let's say 2 years, 3 years out? What is in store for Mesa as you look forward?
I think it's. I would actually say that let's crystal ball even further, because our vision is much larger. Our goals are much larger. So I think if you fast forward 5 years, 6 years, let's say 10 years, I think our goal is to become that one-stop destination of sorts, the new age institution, which becomes synonymous with the startup ecosystem in our country. So if I am a young individual, let's say 17, 18 years to 28, 30 years, and if I want to make myself more relevant, either for the first time or the second time or the third time, for playing a role in that startup ecosystem as an operator, as a leader, as a founder, then they should come to Mesa. And there will be a program for them at Mesa. If I am a startup founder, if I am a startup operator or a leader, and I'm looking for hiring great, hungry, talented, skilled folks across levels, across functions in business roles, then I will not go anywhere else. I will first come to Mesa and say that I'm looking for, let's say, a great category P&L leader. There should be somebody at Mesa. I'm looking for a great product manager. There will be somebody at Mesa. I'm looking for a great customer success specialist who is at entry level. There will be somebody at Mesa. So that's the vision, honestly. And I think at that point, we should play a much larger role than just bridging this talent, supply and demand. I think we should be inspiring people to take risk. We should be, we should have built a degree of credibility and network where some of those network effects start playing in, where our alumni start inspiring a lot of younger generations and start moving in this movement, like direction of this movement where skills become a lot more important than degrees. And we want to be at the forefront of that for the startup ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you, Ankit, Varun, for taking out the time today and walking us through the way you have conceptualized this program. It was super insightful, and I'm sure it had a lot of nuggets of wisdom for future entrepreneurs and leaders looking to build out in education. We have been big believers in education at Elevation and consistently end up backing few companies every year. We believe that there are a lot of unsolved problems in education, and if you are a founder who believes the same and is starting up in education, feel free to reach out to us. Also, if you are a startup leader who feels very passionately about education and wants to give back to the ecosystem, I would strongly encourage you to partner with Mesa and explore various opportunities at Mesa School. Please feel free to reach out to Ankit and Varun over LinkedIn, and thanks again.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here, Manish. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.